Good evening, everyone. Nice to see such a big crowd this evening. My name is Dave Gear, and I serve as director of the School of Music. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the beautiful Voxman Music Building and the fourth lecture in this year's Creative Matters series. I'm standing in this evening for Chris Merrill, who has been our host for Creative Matters since its inception in the fall of 2015. Following Chris's pattern, I wish to begin by extending a special thank you to Interim Vice President for Research and Economic Development, John Keller, whose leadership of the research enterprise and support for the arts and humanities is crucial to the life of our community. We are particularly grateful to him for his continued support of this series. Creative Matters has, over the past 3 years, showcased artists, thinkers, builders, and doers who challenge conventional thinking about the creative process. The series grew out of the work of the Arts Advancement Committee, chaired by Alan McVeigh, whose charge was to synthesize energies, forge connections across disciplines, and spark new ideas in conjunction with the rebuilding of our arts campus. Creative Matters has given us the opportunity to explore the act of creation as a universal human impulse and an ineffable link to one another. We hope that you have the series' last event on your calendars. Genre-bending theater artist and, like our guest tonight, MacArthur Genius Fellow Taylor Mack will be here on April 26th at 7 o'clock p.m. I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to thank my colleagues Chris Merrill, Ann Ricketts, and Leslie Reveau, who have propelled this series with their imagination and hard work. The symphony orchestra is a complex instrument of limitless artistic possibility, and its repertoire a monument to human creativity and expression. It is also an institution deeply bound and perhaps constrained by tradition, ever committed to preserving the past while at the same time evolving and engaging new listeners. New York Times music critic Alex Ross has written eloquently and provocatively about the state of classical music and its flagship, the orchestra, describing it as an ageless diva on a nonstop farewell tour, coming around for one absolutely final performance. The tour never ends, though, and the symphony orchestra endures. It is an honor to introduce this evening Marin Alsop, one of the world's great orchestral conductors and an ardent champion of classical music, devoted to the art form and its ongoing relevance. Upon her appointment in 2007 as the music director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, Maestro Alsop became the first woman to head a major American orchestra. I believe she remains the only woman to lead a major American orchestra. Called a born communicator, an effective proselytizer for music by the New York Times, and a lively entertainer, as well as a powerhouse musician by the San Francisco Chronicle, Alsop has spent a lifetime dedicated to music. The first woman to conduct the last night of the Proms in its more than 100-year history, she also was the first conductor to be named a MacArthur Genius Fellow. In 1991, she made her professional conducting debuts with the Philadelphia Orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, the London Symphony, and the Los Angeles Philharmonic. She continues to appear regularly with these orchestras, in addition to the London Philharmonic. One of Leonard Bernstein's best-known pupils, Alsop is central to his 100th anniversary global celebrations this year, including a series of concerts this summer with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at the Ravinia Festival, where she has been appointed musical curator for the 2018 and 2019 seasons. Just a week or so ago, Naxos released a box set of her Bernstein recordings. Maestro Alsop took up the post of principal conductor of the Sao Paulo Symphony Orchestra, Brazil's premier orchestra, in 2012 and became music director in 2013. She will leave that appointment in 2019 when she begins as artistic director of the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra, making her the first woman to take up that prestigious role. In Baltimore, Alsop has been credited with reinvigorating the orchestra and leading a major community outreach effort that has generated tremendous excitement. In 2008, along with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, she unveiled Orc Kids, an education initiative that provides music education, instruments, and mentorship to more than 1,000 kids in Baltimore. For adults, Marin Alsop conducts the BSO Academy, a summer fantasy camp for adults, and the biannual Rusty Musicians event, which gives amateur players the opportunity to play music with the BSO. I have just barely touched on her many accomplishments. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marin Alsop.
Thank you. Thank you very much. They gave me enough cord to hang myself, I think. Good. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's so nice to be out of the traffic. I really appreciate that. And, you know, the idea of speaking about creativity, I thought about that quite a lot. And then I just thought, but everything we do is creative in life. And you know, I was fortunate because I didn't grow up with a lot of the advantages, you know, that define privilege. We didn't have much money. We didn't have a house. We didn't have, you know, we even lived in the car for a while. And but I think I grew up with with possibly the biggest advantage of all, because I grew up in a house that was filled with creativity, and it manifests itself mostly in music, because my parents were both professional musicians. But it also sort of emerged in other ways, and maybe creativity is a byproduct of not having enough money to hire people to do things, so you have to be creative, or not having enough resources to really be able to buy the things you need, so you have to build them. But it spurred a lot of creativity in our household, and I just think back to my childhood when the gas pedal fell off the car and my dad rigged up a hand throttle, and he drove the car like that for several years. And, you know, this is kind of the way, or later in life when he said, you know, I really think we should have a concert series, but I don't like the concert halls around. I'll build one in the backyard. So he did. And that idea of, you know, sort of just creating your own environment and trying to respond to the moment in as creative a way as you can. And that's how it was growing up with my parents. My father is a violinist and my mother is a cellist. And I try to think back, like, what were they up to when they were 20, 23, 24 years old? And I imagine them sitting in this little one-room apartment that we had and saying, you know, we could really use a pianist. Let's make one. So that's why I was born. So, you know, there's nothing like being born with a job, I tell you. So I, as soon as I could stand, I think, I started playing the piano, or I think when I was about 2, I started piano. And my mother says I was absolutely a genius. I think every mother says that, right? And I really hated the piano. I hated it. I hated it more than anything in the world, and except for those party shoes that she made me wear when I played a piano recital. But I really hated the piano, and the only reason I would do it at all was because when I would play a recital, I could eat chocolate. So that's stayed with me. Like, so that's the only reason I do anything in life still to this day, is if I can eat chocolate. But I retired from piano when I was 6. And what happened was I was having these, I hope there are no psychiatrists here. I was having these terrible dreams that the black keys were teeth and they were going to eat me. And so my mother would, you know, it's time to practice. And I'd sit there and I'd scream, you know, just like for an hour. And oh, I wish you could have known my mother. But as my mother says, you know, when she's heard me speak in the past, she said, I don't recognize this story at all. So I want to tell you that. But my mother, she won every argument with everyone. But this one she didn't win. My screaming for an hour, and she said, okay, all right, already, you don't have to play the piano. So I was free for a while. And, you know, I remember that year when I could climb trees and nobody said you're going to break your arm. And then we lived in Manhattan. We lived in this basement apartment on 107th in Amsterdam. And, you know, it was so... my view of the world was shoes going by. You know, there's like one window on the sidewalk, and I should have become a shoe salesperson probably. But my mom said, you know, how would you like to go to summer camp? And, you know, I thought, wow, it's amazing. Even when you're 7, you have like an archetypal image of summer camp as sailing and horseback riding and, I don't know, croquet or some exotic game like that. And so I said, sure, I'd love to go to summer camp. But my parents had to go on tour, so they said, well, you'll have to take the train there by yourself. But I was already 7, so I was good. And my mother said, oh, right before I was supposed to get on the train, oh, we forgot to tell you, you might have to play the violin at this summer camp. And so I thought, well, that's okay, in between, I'll squeeze it in between horseback riding and camping or whatever I'm doing. And so I went to a camp called Meadowmount, which is, it's known as the violin concentration camp, just so you know. And, there I went with my new violin in the case. I never even opened it. I never played the violin. And so I got off the train and my violin teacher met me and she said, okay, so just want to give you the schedule, and so we get up and have breakfast, and then you'll practice from 8 until 1. But luckily I was 7, I really had no sense of time, so I was like, okay, sure, whatever. And the things I remember about it really were that first they put me in the pantry, and I ate everything in the pantry. So as I was getting chubbier and chubbier, they kept moving me to a different room. So that's really what I remember about practicing. Mostly I was trying to distract myself, but it was an amazing thing because I absolutely fell in love with playing the violin. And there was something about the violin, and of course now as an adult, thinking back, I realized that the piano just wasn't my instrument at all. I didn't like it. It didn't feel like me. But the violin, it was, I don't know, something about it really suited me. And also the great thing was that you get to play with other people, and I like that a lot. I mean, you can when you play piano too, of course, but it's a little easier with the violin, Anyway, so I got pretty good after I was at summer camp for 8 weeks. And I did practice some of that time. I didn't eat the whole time. And when I went back to New York, I auditioned for Juilliard pre-college, and I got in. So I got pretty good in 8 weeks. And the best part was that I got to play in the orchestra. And, to be surrounded with kids and to be surrounded with this sound, I remember that. And I sat right next to the timpani guy, and he was really cute and played really loud, and it was just so exciting, the whole thing. And so it was going, I thought, okay, this is going to be all right. This classical music thing is not so bad. It's going to be all right. And so it went pretty well for maybe a year, and then the director of the orchestra called my parents in and said, we have to talk to you because we're getting a lot of complaints that someone in the back of the second violin section is trying to lead the whole orchestra. So that was me, and I thought, oh no, and here we go again with this. So many rules in classical music, and it seems so snobby. I mean, my parents were not snobby at all. That's the thing. They were all about joy and playing music. I think also because my dad was, even though he was a fantastic violinist, he also played saxophone. And he played clarinet, and he played flute, and he played in a big band, and he'd always play along with the Frank Sinatra records at home and all these jazz guys. And my dad he was actually a really annoying whistler. He was one of those sort of covert whistlers, like you didn't know who was whistling, and he would be whistling theme and variations on the Nutcracker, during the holiday season. I mean, it made my mom and I crazy. And so, but then a contractor heard him whistling, one of the guys that hires the musicians, and hired him. And so he whistled all those Irish Spring commercials and stuff. And he made so much money that we had to endure his whistling. We couldn't comment on it. Anyway, but maybe because their approach to music was much more organic. It was about having fun and making music. Whereas I felt when I went to the conservatory, when I went to Juilliard, even as a 7-year-old, that it was much more about obeying the rules and behaving, and this was definitely not my thing at all. And luckily, my father took me to hear a concert at the New York Philharmonic when I was 9, and this was shortly after they had been called in by the director. And I went, and this guy came out to conduct the orchestra, and we were sitting really close, like right, I could almost touch him. And he was, first of all, he's wearing a turtleneck. He looked very hip. That was hip in those days. And he turned around and he started talking to me. I'm talking to the audience, but I thought it was me, about the music and what he liked about it and how excited he was to play this piece for me. And then he jumped on the podium and started jumping around and laughing and, smiling. And so I'm thinking, okay, nobody seems to be yelling at this guy. If I'm the conductor, I can have fun. So that was it. I decided that day I was going to become a conductor, and that guy was Leonard Bernstein. And I just fell in love with him right away. And my dad, he bought me a poster and put it up in my room next to the Beatles. So it was the Beatles and Leonard Bernstein, but Bernstein was bigger. And so I thought, oh, this is so fantastic. That's what I'm going to do. And so I went back to Juilliard the next Saturday, and I told my violin teacher, I said, so listen, I have great news. I've decided what I'm going to become. I'm going to become a conductor. And she said, well, you're too young to conduct. And she said, and girls don't conduct. I know. And I said, even then I was like, okay, one of these is going to be a problem. So I thought, I went home. I was really, really upset. I'd never even considered the thought that a girl couldn't do something. My mom played the cello. She played the big instrument. She was really bossy, and my dad had to carry it. I thought this was a great arrangement. I thought women were in charge and men had to carry everything. That was my view. And so I went home and I told my parents that I said, oh, you're not going to believe what happened. And my mother was so mad. I never saw her so angry. She's, I'm going to sue them. She's going crazy. And I never saw a reaction like this. And my father, who, no one could really get a word in edgewise. He was very quiet. And when I came down for breakfast the next day, there was this long wooden box, and I opened it up, and it was filled with batons. And that was when my dad, and that was my parents. That was how they said, you can do whatever you want to do, and we totally support you. And my mom was going to be outraged on my behalf, and my dad was going to quietly try to make it happen for me. And that's how it went my whole life. As long as I was going to be a musician, of course. That was the only caveat. Because I did, I'm the only person on the planet that when I applied to Yale University, and my parents said, why would you want to waste time going there? And when I got in, my parents said, that's really a total waste of your time. Don't go there. So they're the only parents in history that ever said that, just so you know. This idea of becoming a conductor, I wanted to do it, but conducting, unlike playing the violin, it's so tricky because if you don't have 20 friends come over every day, you can't ever practice. You can wave your arms, but it's nothing like actually conducting. And I felt insecure now that my teacher said girls couldn't do this, and I didn't see any women on the podium. I saw my hero, Bernstein, and I would make my dad take me to every single concert, and I loved seeing him, but it was in my head that this is what I wanted to do. So I tried to figure out ways to educate myself. So I asked my dad to buy me the miniature scores, the study scores. So I'd learn all the parts as I was playing in the orchestra. And eventually, I started to talk friends into playing for me. And I remember I did a Mozart symphony with guitar and 2 saxophones. And you know what I mean? It was whoever would play for me. I would try. I just want to try to be a conductor. And as I said, I sort of had this rebellion where I went to Yale. And then I went back to Juilliard. That was my rebellion. And then I came back to Juilliard and I finished my degree in violin, got my master's at Juilliard. And, still all along the way, I was trying to figure out how does one become a conductor. But this, again, it's a very, 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 very tricky thing. And I had a backup plan. This was the big thing about my parents, and I think this is a big thing about creativity, is that, you never just have one idea. You always have a plan. My dad was big into plan B. Have have a backup plan just in case. But it always had to be in music. That was the only, by the way. So I had a backup plan that if the conducting wasn't going to work out, I was going to be a rock musician. And rock violinist. I mean, in those days there were none. Now at least it's kind of trendy. But so that was my other plan, and so I had that in my mind too. But while I was at Juilliard getting my master's, I thought, I should check out this rock and roll thing. I better just get that going just in case the conducting doesn't work. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And so I was looking for somebody to write me some music, because I was trained at Juilliard, and, you have the music and you read the music and then you perform the music like Mozart. And so I met a guy, I did a TV commercial, and I thought, oh, he's a good arranger. And I said, listen, I have this incredible string rock band. I didn't have any band, I just made it up in the moment. And I said, would you write some music for us? And he said, oh, no, I don't really, rock isn't my thing. I like swing music. I played with Woody Herman's band. And so I said, oh, swing music, sure, that'd be fine. You could write swing music. So first of all, you have to remember, I heard my dad playing with Frank Sinatra, but I didn't know the first thing about swing music. And so meanwhile, I'm telling you this story, for this is like an aside. There are a lot of detours in my life. And so I called all my friends and I said, okay, listen, we're going to have a swing band. And so all my friends from Juilliard, and I got 14 of us together, all these string players, and my new friend Gary came, and he wrote a piece, and he said, look, I'll go get a drink and have a coffee, and I'll come back in an hour after you guys rehearse it. So, but the thing I need to tell you is that we didn't even know that you had to swing the eighth notes, so it's like, no, we didn't know anything, it was like playing in the mood, do 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 do, instead of ba da 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 da. We didn't know anything. So Gary came back. It sounded terrible, and my friends are playing, and I see them all looking at each other. And this wasn't our first adventure, as you can imagine. And they're all looking at each other like, okay, we've got to get away from her now. She's gone off the deep end. And so Gary came back, and we performed this little thing we had rehearsed. I wish I had a video. I never saw anyone laugh as hard as Gary Anderson laughed at us. And, so then he started explaining, no, come on, you guys, you have to swing the eighth notes. And all my friends were like, okay, we're done. Marin, this is the last bad and this was not my first idea, of course, as you can imagine. So they'd already been around the block with me for a few times. So I said, no, come on, and another thing that you probably already know about me without knowing me is that as soon as someone says you can't do something, I really have to do it. So my big four-letter word is can't. I love that word because as soon as someone says it, I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. So Gary said, no, this isn't going to work, and all my friends, this isn't. So I said, come on, we can do this. So I found a church that would let us get together at 11 o'clock at night there on 46th Street. And so we'd get there every night, whoever could come, and we'd, try to practice a swing idea. And I bring records, and we play. And anyway, after about 6 months, we could swing 12 minutes of music. It's kind of sounded a little bit hip. And then I decided, okay, well, we need to play in a jazz club. And I'd never even been in a jazz club. And so I went to every jazz club in New York. I was so tired. I can't, you have to stay up really late to go to a jazz club. And I finally found a woman who owned a jazz club, and we were talking. I said, look, I have this 14-piece string swing band. And she said, oh, it's great. That's just what I need. Why don't you guys come in on Thursday and play? And so, all 14 of us go. And have you been in a jazz club in New York? The stage is like this big. There's like little trio. So all 14 of us with our violins and our cellos and everything, we're all on the stage, and we're playing our little 12 minutes of music. And anyway, it turned out that the New York Times happened to come that night, and they were like, "Oh man, this is the wildest thing we've ever heard. It's so crazy. You got to catch this." So we started playing at this jazz club every week. And it was packed, and all these guys from the business, particularly the jingle business, commercial business, started coming to hear these crazy string players that could swing. Kind of, but in those days you didn't really have to swing to swing, and I'm playing the violin. So, these days it's harder. But so they started coming, all these guys, and they started, hiring me to play every commercial in New York, because I also then started improvising a little bit and stuff. So, I think the height of my career was I improvised tangos for Lysol, like toilet bowl cleaner or something. And, and I'm doing that and I'm thinking, wow, this is really not what I would imagine I would end up doing. But the best part, and maybe it's just my idea of trying to share with you this idea of the path is not always clear, that often these detours end up leading you to the right place, and it's important to be open and creative in everything you do because you never know where that road's going to take you. So the amazing thing about this whole experience, besides the fact that my swing band called String Fever, we played together for 20 years, and we still have reunions. We don't play together anymore. We just drink. But the great thing was I started earning a lot of money because commercial work was abundant in New York at that time, and I was in high demand as a Juilliard-trained fiddle player that could improvise tangos when you needed somebody. And so I thought, and in the meantime, I was still working on my conducting, and I kept applying to Juilliard because that's where I got my master's degree. And after 4 times, the first time I applied, I had just graduated with my master's degree, and they sent me a letter saying that my academic credentials didn't meet their standards. I'd just gotten my master's from them. And then the second time I got an audition, and I got all the way to the end, the last round, and they would put wrong notes in the parts so that the applicant would have to sort of find the wrong notes. And I don't know, I made some joke about it, and the musicians started laughing, and then they threw me out. That'll be enough. And then the next year I went again, and I had to play some piano reduction, and I'm a violinist, I'm not a pianist, and it was just awful. And how my relationship with the piano, so it didn't go well. And I said to the teacher at that time, I said, you don't understand. This is the only thing in life I want to do, and if you take me as a student, I will be the best conducting student you ever had, I promise. And I saw him, a very tall German man, and I almost had him, almost. But he said, no, your muscles have atrophied. I think I was 22, 23 years old. And if you can't play this Mahler symphony on piano, you will never be a conductor. So that's when I realized, okay, I'm not going to school. I'm done with this. I can't do this. It's not, I will knock on the front door, knock my head against it even for a long time. But there's a point where you have to just go around the side of the building and climb in the window. So I said, okay, I'm done with that. So meanwhile, I was playing at the jazz club and earning money, and I decided I would just save every dime I made. And, this is another lesson I learned early on, that the best investment you can make is an investment in yourself. And so I saved $10,000, which was a lot of money in that day. And I decided with the $10,000 I would start an orchestra that I would conduct. So that's what I did instead. And, I thought, I'd just make it low-key at Lincoln Center. And so that's what I did because it was right next to Juilliard. And so, and that's another thing about me is that I just can't help it. I don't know. So I started an orchestra, and, then I needed, I needed a board of directors, and I needed to raise money because $10,000 for a concert in an orchestra, you can blow that in one night. And so I had all my friends from String Fever played in the orchestra. My parents played sometimes when I needed people to play for free. And then, it was fantastic because my friends became my teachers, and they would help me not just about physically what worked and what didn't work, but how to communicate with them. And I started off and I would apologize every time the oboe played a wrong note. I'd say I'm sorry. I don't know why. It was just and they trained me out of that. They really just incredible lessons that my friends were willing to tell me and share with me, and I'm eternally grateful to all of them. But I needed to raise some money too, so I thought about, my band had played a wedding, and the guy paid in cash. So I thought, oh, he could be a good board of directors person, don't you think? Because he's got cash. So I called him up, and he said, I said, can I take you for a drink? And so this guy, really, I didn't know him, Japanese businessman. And I said, Mr. Taki, I know you don't know me, and you probably think I'm crazy, but the only thing in life I want to do is become a conductor, and I really need help. I need support. I need advice. I need business acumen. And he said, "Oh, absolutely, I'll help you." And this gentleman, who he owned Anne Klein clothing and was in the fashion industry, this gentleman, Tomio Taki, he supported my orchestra for 18 years, and he believed in me. God knows why, but still to this day, I talked to him yesterday. We're very good friends, and he made me understand that there are people in the world who will just believe in you and really will support you. There were no strings attached. He didn't particularly even like classical music. He was about talent and trying to see people succeed. And I remember when we decided that we couldn't continue on with the orchestra because my schedule was too busy and the board didn't want to, have a different conductor. And he said, so Marin, we achieved our goal of, enabling you to be a conductor, be a woman on the podium. And he said to me, but what about all the other women? What are you going to do? That's what he said. So I started in 2002, which is the year we stopped the Orchestra Concordia. I started a fellowship to say thank you to Mr. Taki, called the Taki Concordia Fellowship. And Concordia was the name of the orchestra. And, he inspired me to try to change the landscape for other young women. And, where he came from, I don't know, but I'm so glad I played that wedding that one day, and that's what will happen in life. These people will come into your life, and they will just change it because of who they are. And I think it's important to always say thank you. And having this fellowship in his name is very important to me. And what I try to do is give women opportunities that aren't make or break opportunities, because as Dave was saying in the introduction, I had these chances when I was 30 to be the first woman to conduct subscriptions everywhere, but it was so terrifying. I can't even tell you. The expectations were that you were a cross between Leonard Bernstein and Mother Teresa, and something like that. There was no way to meet these expectations whatsoever. And I hadn't conducted much at all. I needed to get some experience. I needed to make mistakes. That's another thing that I learned at that moment, that there's not a lot of chance when you're in that kind of position to make errors. And in order to be successful, it's really important to make mistakes. So I started a fellowship for people to make mistakes. That's what I decided. And so the women that are selected come and conduct overtures with me or with colleagues of mine, and they can make mistakes, and it's not just them. So we've had 12 recipients of the fellowship since 2002, and every single person is succeeding. We have 5 American music directors now out of those women, and I'm very, very, very proud of that. But I do believe that the lesson Mr. Taki taught me about, okay, it's one thing for you to succeed, but how are you going to change the world for the next people coming after you? I had a lot of experience with people saying, well, it was really hard for me, so it's going to be really hard for you. But I don't believe this at all. Mr. Taki once said to me, it was hard for them so that it could be easier for you. And that's what I really try to live by. But of course, getting from having my own orchestra to where I am today was not so easy. And I applied to so many programs. I wanted to study at Tanglewood, of course, because there was that guy there who would teach every summer named Leonard Bernstein. And I've applied to Tanglewood 5 times. And on the 5th time, somehow miraculously, I got in. And I went and I did pretty well. And the moment came when I was called in by the Seiji Ozawa. And he said, well, we think you're a fast learner. And we decided that you're going to conduct the program with Leonard Bernstein next week. And I thought, oh my God. I was so excited. I mean, you know, he was my hero, and I was so excited that I was concerned that I was going to have a heart attack and die and miss it. So really, because I would. Anyway, so Bernstein came to Tanglewood, and he came to the room where we rehearsed with the two pianos, and he walked in, you know, and there was TV everywhere. I mean, the media was insane. And he walked in the room and he said, "Now, where's Marin?" And I thought, I have died and gone to heaven. This is my dream come true. And you know, this was another experience for me where someone exceeded all of my expectations. He was so generous and so giving, and he gave me a conducting lesson that I'll never forget. And everyone disappeared. You know, it was like that first time I saw him when I was 9 years old. It was just me, him, and me, and It was amazing, and he became not only my hero but my role model on every level. And you know, it was not just about conducting; it was about what kind of citizen of the world you want to be, because he was a person who stood up for what he believed in, whether you agreed with him or not really didn't matter. But watching someone, you know, really take chances was a great privilege for me. And I think because he never did anything in terms of my career. You know, he never called and said, you should hire her or something. But every time there's a photographer near, he would grab me. So I think because everyone was like, whose head is in that photo? Every single photo. Somebody said, well, we should give her an audition because her head is in every photo. So that's what happened. And I started to get a few auditions, and as I did that, I was able to, you know, get a few positions. And I went from Manhattan to Eugene, Oregon, which was my first job as music director. And I remember that vividly. Oops, sorry. Because I'd never lived anywhere except Manhattan, except for at Yale. And, you know, the thing you don't realize is that it's really dark unless you live in Manhattan. That's what I remember now. I went to Eugene. I couldn't see anything. I was like, my God, it's so dark here because there's lights on all the time in New York. Anyway, but the Eugene Symphony was a fantastic experience for me. And it was a study in creativity because it was a community that was, I mean, it seems very much like the community here, very highly educated, very interested in humanity, in thought, in discussing issues. And so they were open to all kinds of ideas. So I was able to really start to experiment with, not just with conducting and being with a wonderful orchestra, but also in how to connect with audiences and things like I started a lunchtime series just to talk about music. And I was so touched because many of the people never came to the symphony. They just came to that series. And I found that really moving, that people could have a relationship with music and not even buy a ticket to an orchestra concert, but that everyone should be able to access music. This felt very important to me. And I think that all of these creative people that I had the opportunity to experience as a young person influenced who I am today and the way I want to exist in the world. But particularly, probably the most formative was that moment when I picked up the violin, and it felt like the right instrument for me. And I think that playing an instrument is so transformative for a young person. You know, it develops incredible skills, but besides the intense and immense coordination needed to play a string instrument or any instrument, the hand-eye coordination, how do you use your hearing, how do you motivate yourself to practice every day? As a young person, this is really an incredible lesson, and that nothing comes fast overnight. Everything is a process that if you apply yourself, you get better and better at. And then the whole dimension of self-esteem, you know, in mathematics, you know, you're right or you're wrong, but when you play the violin, you're always right. You know, everybody's like, wow, you play the violin, it's so great. And so the sense of self-esteem, and then playing with other kids, you know, where you have to step back and listen, and then when you have to step forward. I mean, all of these skills are about, they're transferable to every single discipline. these are the kind of people that you want working for you, because they don't need supervision. They know how to motivate themselves. They know how to listen. They know how to work together. And I think that every child should have the ability to find the instrument that's right for them. So when I went to the, it was a long journey, but when I was appointed music director of the Baltimore Symphony, the thing that struck me the most was the fact that Baltimore is 75% African American, and the orchestra was, and still have one African American musician in the orchestra. And that's because the economics of playing an instrument and getting private lessons, they just wipe out an entire segment of humanity, people that don't have access. So I decided that to propose that we should start a program so that kids in West Baltimore could find their instrument. And, it was a long process to get this program started, but luckily the MacArthur Foundation came in and gave me some money, so that helped jumpstart things a little bit. But we started in 2008 with 30 kids in first grade. And we didn't know if it would work at all or if they'd be interested. And it became, we couldn't grow fast enough to accommodate all the kids and all their siblings and everybody is, started wanting to be part of this program. And the great joy I have to say is that today we have 1,300 kids playing musical instruments, and they are my heroes. They are so self-possessed and such beautiful kids, and they really have all of those skills plus many, many more. And we added years below them, so the kids we started with 10 years ago are now in high school, and 15 of them are in the high school for the performing arts, and 30 of them went this last summer to Interlochen Academy in Michigan, and 2 went to Italy for a special program there. These are kids that really, they never left their block when I first met them. And these are kids that now travel the world, and they have a sense of possibility. I don't expect that they'll become all professional musicians. I mean, if a couple do, it would be fantastic. But it made me realize that music is a great, it's a great equalizer. And it's a great vehicle for communication, for overcoming issues of, I think, tolerance and understanding. And, my hope is that maybe in 20 years when I'm at the doctor in Baltimore, she says, "Oh, yeah, I remember you. I was an orchid," and or maybe the next mayor will say, "I was and we named the program Orchid. It's Orchestra Kid. So we call them our Orchids. And I thought I'd just play a short video for you. This is quite old. This is from, I think, 2010 or 2011, so we only had a couple hundred kids in the program. But it'll give you an idea, I think, of what they're doing.
Hardly any place needs that change more than West Baltimore, where poverty, drugs, and shootings are endemic, where since last fall, young children carrying musical instruments to school has been a common sight.
Saxophone? All right.
About 150 pre-K to third graders at Lockerman Bundy Elementary School belong to a new privately funded music program started by Marin Alsop, the conductor of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. Called Orchestra Kids, or Orchids for short, it's another example of the system taking root in America.
It's all about exposure at a very, very young age. There's so many skill sets that you need. Coordination, you have to develop your ear, you have to develop your brain. And just like learning a foreign language, the younger you start, the more fluent you become.
And that's what you're trying to do with Orchids.
It's sort of a work in progress.
Work really kicked off last October when a truck pulled up at the school carrying $50,000 worth of musical instruments. Enough for an orchestra, and enough to make these kids think it was Christmas.
You got a big one. What's the...
Parents are parents. When you offer someone's child an opportunity to better themselves,
People jump at it, huh?
They jump at it.
So you want to show your dad what you can do? Let's come on in here.
We saw an example of that when Alsop and Dan Trahey, who runs Orchids, ran into tuba player Miguel Ware. He's 5.
All right. All we need from you guys is a commitment that he'll be here.
Parents have to sign a contract promising that kids like Miguel will be there, get good grades, and take care of their instruments. When the regular school day ends at 3:15, the kids start making music. If they stick with the program, they'll be doing it all the way from kindergarten to the 5th grade.
So this is when we only had 150 kids, and now there are 1,300 kids. So this is a few years ago. But maybe the best thing I can tell you is that so people often ask me, what's it going to be like in Vienna, and what's it going to be like, and what are your aspirations, what are your dreams? So my dream is to have 10,000 orchids in Baltimore. There are 80,000 kids in the public school system, and I believe if we had 1 out of 8 kids in the program, that would be able to touch all 80,000 kids. And I think that, in some small way, music could possibly heal some of the problems that we have, and at least it provides a safe haven for these kids, and they have each other, they have us, and their parents are absolutely wonderful. Another dream of mine is to have a choir with their parents, because their parents are very jealous that they're not involved enough in the music part of it. But I guess the biggest story I could tell you is the other day I went to see the little ones, the new first graders, and I was sitting next to me was a little girl about 9, 10 years old, and next to her a little boy, and we were listening, and during a little pause, the boy leans over and he says, Miss Marin, they call me Miss Marin. Miss Marin, I want to be a conductor. And the girl sitting between us smacks him on the leg, and she says, boys can't do that. So maybe this was, sort of, I thought, okay, my work here is finished. So I have some time. They said, let's do a few questions if you guys would like to go that direction. And so if there are any areas that I haven't talked about, except for any psychiatrists I don't want to talk to. But maybe, do you want to bring up the lights a little bit so we can see each other? You seem to know where all the switches are in this building. Some spectacular complex that you have here. It's really marvelous. I got the whole tour. So are there any questions? No? Nobody's brave enough? Go ahead. You can do it.
I know you talked a little bit about you directing at Eugene. How do you get from Eugene to Baltimore, as well as getting to some of the major orchestras in the country?
Yeah, so does everybody hear the question, how did I get from Eugene, my first job, to the Baltimore Symphony? So that's the longer talk I can give, but I sort of skipped like 30 years in the middle. I think it's just a matter of maximizing whatever opportunity you find yourself in at the moment, and that's sort of one of my sayings to myself. And I think, especially when you don't have many opportunities, one learns to sort of use them to, for me, a concert in Eugene wasn't about just a concert. It was about how I could make it an outreach program, how I could add a talk onto it, how could I do this, So my advice is to take whatever situation you find yourself in and try to, just really maximize it. And then what happens is that people start to hear about what you're doing in one place, and that's what happened. My little Eugene Symphony played for the League of American Orchestras because that's another story. They said we couldn't, and then I booked the hall in the middle of their convention, so they had to. I mean, I'm one of, again, they said you can't, so I was like, okay, I've got the $1,000, I'm putting the deposit. Anyway, so, then everybody heard about the Eugene Symphony, and who's this, crazy lady leading the Eugene Symphony. And then that led to another thing, but I think, again, you're the best definer of your own destiny as an individual. And for me, when I started my first orchestra, I focused on the repertoire that I was really interested in then, which was jazz and crossover music, before anybody was doing that. But then I got known for doing contemporary American music. So then I had to find another direction. So I put together an LLC company that I then raised money to do a Brahms cycle, because I wanted to go a different direction. So there's been no point, I think, where I haven't had to reinvent myself and almost force my career in a different direction. So I would say you don't just sit in your first job and wait for something to happen. You're constantly, thinking ahead to how you can better yourself. And if it's always motivated out of wanting to be a better musician or a better whatever you are, I think you'll succeed. So that's my advice. Uh-oh. Hello. It's okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Talk a little bit about a favorite piece of music.
Favorite piece of music? Brahms. I love Brahms. I love Brahms because I remember being maybe 12 or 13 and hearing a Brahms string sextet. And it was the first time I understood that music could actually move me emotionally. Until then I was just good at it, and so I did it. And then it transformed. I was also, a teenager, so everything was very emotional. And I think because Brahms had that effect on me, I've always felt this connection to Brahms. And so, I would say that something like the German Requiem for me is one of the great pieces, and because it speaks to everyone, and it's a human requiem. He almost called it that, a human requiem. And not only do I get to work with an orchestra, but then there's also the human voice and text, and I love that experience also. So I don't know if that helps answers your question. Yes, sir.
Well, a piece that in a way is connected with that, the way you just described it, is the Messiah Charan Dalila.
I'm doing that piece for the first time this year.
I wanted to ask you about, I saw you're doing that next year. I looked up your program schedule for next year.
You can't keep anything secret these days, right?
I was just wondering if that, well, maybe that's possibly connected with your love for Brahms, and just in the spirit of the piece itself, but does that pose special problems for a conductor?
I don't know yet. I haven't learned it. I've never done it. Are you coming to the show? Because the piece I don't think is played that often. And you
I heard it in Chicago a couple of years ago, but you're right, it's rarely performed because it's...
So you'll have to come. I'll get you a good seat. Okay, no, for sure. So I don't know the challenges yet because I haven't, I've only heard it, and I fell in love with it there. So, and Jean-Yves Thibaudet will be my soloist, and he loves the piece. So, great. In the back, yes.
You talked about violin and you talked about what inspires you through music, but what is it about conducting?
Oh, that's a great question. I think about conducting. It wasn't just when I saw Bernstein jumping around. I don't think it was just the aerobic, quality of conducting, but I'm one of those people that, and I think that when I think about all of my students I've had, I mean, this is a gross exaggeration, but I think conducting is it's a profession that appeals to introverts. I know this is a weird thing to say. It's kind of like acting. I think a lot of actors end up being sort of introverts. There's something about, and for me, I was never very gifted at sports or anything, but I was always the captain of the team. Do you know what I mean? Like I was the person to, yeah, let's go, and that kind of thing. But I think it was all born out of an inherent introversion that I have. And there's same thing with conducting, that you know, it's a way to connect on a very deep level, but not be about you. And I mean, this is sort of, you know, true confessions. I mean, I could just say I want to be in charge of the architecture of the piece and my usual, but really I think it's more, I think it's much more of a human connection that I wanted. And I always wanted a big family. See, this is why I was hoping no psychiatrists are here. And I'm an only child. So I think conducting is like about a family. It's about an extension of family. And it's interesting that my first orchestra was really born out of my friends and family, you know, because I think ultimately that's the orchestra I'd like to finish with too, you know, an orchestra filled with friends. And you know, conducting also uses so many parts of one's brain. You know, it's not just the knowledge you need to have about the music, but then, you know, you have to have contextual knowledge about politics, about history, about the biography of the composer, about, I have to know different languages, you know, I have to, so it's, there's never enough, should I be done soon? I'm sensing that. There's never, it's a, you know, it's a bottomless pit of stuff to know, and that really fascinates me too. So I don't know, and it's the greatest thing in the world. And I knew it when I was 9. I can't explain why. When I saw him, I said, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. And you know, every day when I get up, I can't wait to be a conductor. And then my son, I have a son, I became a parent very late in life, and when he was little, he said to me, you know, so, Mama, tell me, you know, when do they make you a citizen and give you money? I was like, okay, I have good news and bad news, right? You know, and so I was telling him that, I was trying to explain to him that, you know, you have to earn your own money, but you have to find a job that never feels like a job, but pays you good money. And that's what conducting ended up being for me, because I never feel like I'm working. I mean, this is a great privilege to be here speaking to you, sharing my story. I mean, this doesn't feel even remotely like a job. You know what I mean? It's a privilege, and I feel that every single day. And I wish everyone could have my life. I mean, the good parts anyway. Yes, yes.
I think a lot of us were familiar with Bernstein's physicality as, you know, we're watching on TV or the concert hall. But I'm curious as to how musicians reacted to his podium technique, strictly speaking, not just his personality or interactions outside the concert hall, but what did they think of his actual technique in the concert hall?
You know what's really interesting about Bernstein, though? When you watch him conducting something like Rite of Spring, it's extremely clear. When he didn't need to be clear, he wasn't clear. But when he really needed to be clear, he was clear. He was very, and his powerful personality and musical intention was so extraordinary that he could draw everybody along with him. It didn't have to be, you know, necessarily technically the greatest conducting on the world, because the humanity of it and the musical intention. I recently I was teaching a class with my conducting students in front of the Baltimore Symphony, and I asked them to tell my conducting students, what are the top things you're looking for? And they came up with musical intention and eye contact. So, you know, and Bernstein had those things in abundance, and I think he could just pull everyone along with him. I mean, some of the greatest conducting are those moments where he's not moving, right? He's conducting with his eyebrows. If you look on YouTube, there are a couple, really, it's fantastic. So I try to emulate that. But I can't move my eyebrows alone. So, do I need to stop there? Okay, whatever. I'm happy to keep going, but I don't want to. Yeah, you be in charge though, because I don't want to be the good cop, bad cop. Yes, in the middle there. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about your tenure with the Cabrillo Festival. Maybe how that has influenced your programming vision.
So I was the music director of this contemporary music festival in California, Cabrillo, for 25 years, and I thought I would go. The conductor before me was Dennis Russell Davies, and he was there 19 years. And I remember thinking, God, who could stay someplace for 19 years? And then I was there 25. So it was fantastic. You know, a little tiny town in Santa Cruz, and when I went there, there were about 3 people attended this music festival, and so it was a great study for me in how to build interest in contemporary music. And the best way to build interest in anything is by getting people involved in the creative process. And I think by opening every rehearsal, by having the composers talk, by having the musicians accessible to the audience, it was a real learning experience. And you know, after 25 years, it was just absolutely packed. And I thought it was a good time for them to try a different musical voice. But I think working with living composers in that context has made me appreciate contemporary music, and I've found so many great talents that I try to bring them everywhere around the world. So I'm not sure I could do an all Chris Rouse program anywhere else but at the Cabrillo Music Festival, but I'd like to try. All right, who wants the last question?
Clearly you've blazed the trail as a woman leader in your field. What advice do you have for aspiring women leaders, particularly in male-dominated fields?
Well, I certainly didn't set out to be a trailblazer. You know, I didn't. I just want to be a conductor. I think, you know, my big advice always is just don't give up. I think that women are smart and they give up, you know, when it's clear that it's not going to work. I'm just not that smart, and I just never gave up, you know. And I think that that's the key to success in many, many ways, is just not giving up. And I think also you have to have a pretty good sense of humor about yourself, especially in order to succeed. But I think leading is a privilege, and it's a big responsibility, and it requires a lot of thought. And I give it a lot of thought every day, and it's quite isolating too to be a leader. You know, I understood early that I couldn't really have friendships among the musicians. You know, when you're a leader, you have to really preserve that. So you have to be prepared for all those things. But I would say the big thing is not to give up, and always, you know, always keep your sense of humor. If you can't have a good couple laughs, it's really not worth it at all. My dad used to say, you know, Marin, if you don't enjoy the rehearsals, you'll never enjoy the concert. And that's a great life philosophy, I think. So that's the way he lived, for sure. All right, thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you.